What up, y'all? It is your favorite podcasters, and we are back with a new podcast. This one called Life Study Revolution.
So why are we doing a new podcast?
Why are we doing a new podcast?
Well, as you may or may not have noticed, LDI is now, for the most part, yes,
And done.
yes. So when LDI was started, it was Sharice's brainchild, and because we were such good friends and we had good chemistry in the first season, she asked me to come on as a co-host in the second season. But we really wanted to start anew. We've had a lot of life changes, personal, professional, and we wanted to start something that was ours together as opposed to sort of one of ours. And so we decided to come back to you with something that'll be similar to LDI, but that will have some other elements to it.
So LDI was mostly kind of like political, academic, right? We didn't talk very much about our personal lives. Whereas for this, it's called Life Study Revolution because we want to mainly talk about what's going on in our actual lives, study for like what's going on in work, what are we working on, that type of thing. Because we're still academics, we're still intellectuals, that's important. And then revolution in terms of like our political involvement and the types of things that we're engaged in outside of academia that relates to like our life work, our political work. So that's one difference. And also, so this, we're going back and forth about what kind of how we want to do this, but I think that this podcast will be much more laid back, not so much editing, not least because we don't know how to edit. we're going producer free this time, we think. So word to Black though, nothing against him.
Oh, absolutely.
And so we just kind of want to have a more kind of dialogical, natural space to just discuss what we said, life, study, and revolution.
And to that end, we're debating on what this is going to look like. And so in a lot of ways, we actually wanted to make room for a little bit more audience engagement. I think in the last iteration, we always did the live chats, which were popping, but we are thinking that we want to pre-record the episodes and then have live talkbacks. And we have not decided any of what this is going to look like, right? So we don't know what days we're going to release or what days we're going to do the lives, but what we're thinking is perhaps a bi-weekly pre-recorded episode with a follow-up live talkback sometime during that same week. But we are also happy to hear from you all about what you think you might be interested in terms of engaging with us. And to that end, we have a Gmail that you can contact us at, which is just LifeStudyRevolution@gmail.com. And so if you have feedback on any of the things that come up today, if you have suggestions, please feel free to share them with us and we will take all those things into consideration as we move forward.
So to clarify, what we're thinking is like, if there's 4 weeks in a month, right? Week 1 will be the pre-recorded podcast, and week 2 would be like the live chat. And so that's when we'll be talking to you all live, funky, fresh, and in person, reflecting back on the episode, but also anything that comes up in the chat. Not anything that comes up in the chat because y'all be wild sometimes. And so that's what we're thinking about in terms of format. And because another thing too is that LDI was a lot of work, like doing the interviews, like researching for the different stories we wanted to talk about, coming up with all the segments. And so if we still think weekly is a good sort of pace, but having one be live, and again, that's much less preparation. It'll just help us be more consistent. We're both going to be on fellowship, which we'll talk about in our the live segment, but we still have lives, right? And so we just want to make it as sort of the least heavy lift as possible while we're still doing interesting content. So.
Yeah. And I mean, to that end, we talked about it. We may still have times when we bring on folks whose books we're reading to talk with them, but it won't necessarily be a fixed format. Like every week we'll have an interview. This is something that in the last iteration, Sharice was really like, I didn't want to do an interview podcast, and it just really turned into an interview podcast. And so we just want to leave room for all of the things that are kind of happening with us and what we're interested in, and we want to be able to engage all those things.
And so we're thinking about like hour and a half, which was kind of the length of LDI. So, which is a good, if we have about 3 segments, like 20 or so minutes per segment, a little bit more, a little bit less. And yeah, we still want to have people on to talk. I mean, I got no smoke with interviews, but like, I think that we have our own opinions. We have this stuff to say, right? But I think we'll be in conversation with, different people about different things. But also just not having it be interview format, again, takes some of the work out, because you got to email folks, you got to follow up with them, you got to come up with the questions, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we just want to make this as sort of low stakes as possible while we're still contributing to the zeitgeist.
All right, so let's get into it then.
Oh, a couple more things. So just two more things. One is social media. Like, so I'm different about social media, but we'll probably have social media. So Twitter, what's it? Oh,
Twitter and
Instagram. Yeah.
Oh no, we did say Facebook too, because my dad is an avid watcher, follower, and most of his social media engagement is via Facebook. So we kind of realized that some of our older contingency do tend to engage via Facebook, but YouTube will be the primary home, just like it kind of was last time. So we'll have the videos on YouTube, and we will, share things, disseminate things through our social media platforms, but the videos will be housed on YouTube.
And it's something we have to think about is TikTok, because I know the new generation is on TikTok. We ain't doing no goddamn dances or nothing, y'all. Okay, but like, we want to post clips or something from the show, so that's another possibility. But again, this is still very much information. And so, by the way, if anybody wants to volunteer to edit our show, if anybody wants to volunteer to do the social media, let us know. And by volunteer, we mean free, which leads to Patreon. We're considering doing a Patreon, especially if we do have somebody who comes on to do the editing work or works with us in any capacity. We're still undecided about that, because again, this is just kind of like a pet project. Yeah. We're not, people who are trying to make a living off this or anything. And so let us know what you think in terms of Patreon. Yeah. Because again, theoretically with Patreon, you have to offer something above and beyond what's offered for free. Yeah. Theoretically. So again, we're very much on the fence about that. So yeah.
Okay.
LSR. Here
we go. So we are on vacation, kinda. So Sharice is always pulling me into things, and this is why I say you got to get you a good friend who thinks about you when things come up, right? So we are on this little, I say mini, but I guess it's not really mini. I keep saying a mini European tour. And the reason why we ended up on this European tour this summer is because Sharice got an invitation to participate in Radical
Critical Theory Circle.
Radical Critical Theory Circle in Niceros, Greece.
Word to Jody Dean,
yes.
co-editor of Organized Fight Win, Why Communist Women's Political Writing. You can still pick it up on Verso.
Plug. But she got an invitation to present at this conference. And the conference was great, but the conference is also very white. And so Sharice said that she wanted to participate, but she asked them if they would invite me. Somehow in the follow-up of that, there was a secondary invitation to present at a different conference at the end of the month in Nice, which is Marxism and race. I might be mixing up the M's, but that's basically what it is. And so we decided to plan this kind of month-long trip around these two conferences. And so we spent about 5 to 7 days in Greece. We did about 5 days in Sicily. We are currently in Lisbon, Portugal, and we'll kind of round the trip out at the second conference in Nice. So if you all have seen our social medias for the last couple of weeks, that is why we are in Europe. And yeah. Yeah.
So, we're boat people. So we're boat people now. So yeah, so for the radical critical theory circle, I was just like, I am not fucking Ruby Bridges or whatever her name is. I'm not integrating this shit. Although Lester Spence did come last year, and I think he might have been the first Black person ever. But I'm Black, I'm also young. And so I was like, there's just no way. Plus, and it turned out to be a really good thing. I mean, we'll talk about this more in the study section, but it turned out to be a really good thing that both Layla and I were here, because those were the few conversations about race, imperialism, colonialism. So you're welcome, white folks. Thank you for having us, but also you're welcome for those contributions. Maybe you need to think about them.
And there were other folks of color. There were
Mhm.
Palestinians, there were
A Palestinian.
yeah. Well, I'm just trying to,
And
but we were the only Black people. So I would say so. So there were a variety of interesting conversations, but again,
sure.
we definitely were the people pushing the conversation about, as Cherie said, race, imperialism, colonialism, and how it continues to impact the world today.
Right. So, okay, so what are some peaks and valleys of our trip? So one peak is like, so we went on a ferry for the first time. Like, so our travel has been clown shoes, by the way. It's just
been on 10 flights in 3 weeks.
And 2
3.5
ferries. So, but that was the first ferry we took was from Athens to Nisitos, and it was like what, 16 hours, which was actually dope. I had never been on a ferry, and so we ended up getting like a double room, and so it was cool. It had a shower, it had beds and everything. So it was actually a really interesting and good experience. So we're glad. I mean, we could have flown, but we're glad that we took the ferry to just have to say that we did it.
I mean, I'm all about an experience. So when we were looking up so for those of you who don't know, Nisitos is a small volcanic island in the sort of Greek islands, but it's literally like off the coast of Turkey. So it is quite difficult to get to.
It is.
And even like when we were because we had to fly into Athens, and even when we flew into Athens, a lot of Greek people, like when we mentioned Nisitos, they were like, where is that? Right.
And also, what are you doing? Like when we got there, we're like, how about this place? Yes. Off the beaten path.
Yes. So when we realized that it was just going to be extremely difficult to get to, we were like, okay, we can fly. You can't fly to Nisitos. You can fly to another bigger island, which is Kos. And then it's like a hour ferry there. But we were like, I was like, I'm always down for an experience. And so I saw the ferries and I was like, oh, this is like an overnight ferry. Let's see. And like she said, it was a good experience. Again, only Black people, I think. There was another African chap. Yes. But he was selling wares. So yeah. So that was interesting. But yeah, so the workshop was it 4 or 5?
4 days.
4 days straight. It was really organized so that there could be robust conversations around the papers. So each block was like 2.5 hours. Only 2 people presented in each block for like 30 minutes. And so there was an hour and a half left for conversation, question, dialogue, debate after the fact, with breaks in between. So only 2 of those a day. So I guess in total that meant that like 10 people presented over the course of those days?
Something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, and so I mean, I think it was, for me, it's definitely, I've talked about this on LDI a lot. Like I'm a very sort of dialogic learner, and so it's always nice for me to be able to have conversation. Now I will say this, it was basically a political theory workshop, and I am not a political theorist in that strict sense, right? And so there were definitely some conversations that I was checking out.
Me too, and I am a political theorist. So.
But there were other ones that were a lot more, for me, relevant, and I was able to follow and able to contribute to. And so, but I always appreciate even the things that were a little bit more difficult for me to follow. Some of them, I was happy to be there and a witness to the conversation. But the thing about this is, I think what's important, I think to me, when I tell my students, friends, like, being in a situation where you're able to learn and understand that there's always more things to learn, and are able to acknowledge where your deficits are, and your deficit not necessarily being a bad thing, but just a place where you haven't necessarily put all of your energy, and to be able to learn from other people, to me, is something that I greatly appreciate. And I'm happy to always be able to engage in those spaces.
Again, we'll return to this in our study section. I feel like I'm much less interested with it in particular types of intellectual exchange, like, and so what I would call, homogenous spaces. So like the non-homogenous, so like the not all Black, and not only not all Black with a particular political grounding. I'm much less interested in those spaces. I find them to be pedantic, performative, boring, uninteresting a lot of times, right? And I'm invited to do a lot of kind of like academic workshops, and I do them sometimes, but this was interesting because everybody was some sort of radical or Marxist persuasion, ostensibly.
So we gotta talk about the interesting
Yeah.
contingencies and.
Yeah. But I find I'm somebody who for a long time, academia was very central to my life. It still is in some ways, and I really, would thrive off of these, theoretical or very sort of esoteric conversations. And I find them to be boring. And I also find like sort of facile or superficial engagement with my own work to just be tedious, like people asking random questions and, so it's interesting to see that development for me, like in that regard, but it's still something that I enjoy. I just like, I think I prefer things to be more intentional and grounded in something at this point. Yeah.
Okay. But we'll talk more about that.
Yes.
Coming up.
So what's going on, Miss Layla? Going on in your life?
Life is lifing right now. So I'm pretty sure I mentioned it on LDI. So the last season of LDI, I was actually in the throes of my divorce. It was finalized March 10th, 2022. Yeah, 2022. And I'm just out here now. Like I think had already started at Northeastern, but I had not physically been there yet because I was still on fellowship in Germany. So I've just finished my first year in person at Northeastern. One of the things that life is doing to me right now is that I'm just I really hate Boston. I hate living in Boston with a deep-seated passion for so many reasons, because it is so white, so cold, so expensive. The food sucks. I just don't like it. However, Northeastern, as far as jobs go, is actually, I'm enjoying it. Like my chair, Regine Jean-Charles, she is a Haitian woman who's the chair of the chair of the program director of Africana Studies, because my primary appointment is in anthropology, but I really find her to be a great mentor and a help, and somebody who I think really is just supportive of Black faculty figuring out what they need, and not like trying to impose what she thinks they need, but figuring out what they need. To that end, Cherise has now made me realize that apparently I'm a person who spends summers in Europe.
You summer in Europe.
Because this is not going to be a continuous thing, but Regina and I will be teaching a Black France course, or Black Parents, I think Black France course next summer for Northeastern students. And so it'll be my third summer in Europe, which is wild, because prior to going to Germany in 2021, I had never been to Europe, and now it's a thing. So that is what it is. But yes, so I'm here. I am accepting that I will more than likely stay at Northeastern through tenure, which means at least another 4, 5, 6 years. But that also means that, I'm single. I will be 37 this year. I'm single, I'm childless, and I'm dating. And it's fentanyl in a dating pool. It is not an enjoyable experience. And so that might be something that comes up more in the life segments. It's been really challenging, I will say that, to figure out how to find a partner. I think as a Black woman, it's just hard across the board. But then as a Black woman with a particular kind of politics, with a certain level of education, with a certain level of mobility, it's just difficult. So if you know any good people out there, you don't send them my way, but you can send their names to the Gmail. So it's up to you. But yeah, so that's what's happening in my life. But I will say I am happily divorced. Okay, there's no questions about that.
Running her money. You know who I'm talking to, and you know what you owe. Hey.
But yes, so I'm out here just trying to figure out what this next iteration of my personal life is going to look like. What about you?
You guys. Hey, you guys. Okay, so.
Hey, you guys.
So I think since the podcast, I started my new job at Wayne State. So anyway, but I will be going on fellowship this year. So I will be on fellowship in Boston. Again, that was also another catalyst for the podcast, because we'll be in the same place for once, so we'll actually be able to record together. Yeah, so I'll be at Harvard at the Warren Center for American Studies for this Black Power. It's the theme is Black Power. There's a longer title, but shout out to the big homie Jarvis Givens and then Brandon Terry who organized the workshop. And so the project I'll be working on is called Antecedents of Black Power in the McCarthyist Conjuncture, where I'm looking at resonance in themes of triple oppression, fascism, anti-imperialism, and critiques of war between sort of 1947 and 1957, and then the late 1960s and early 1970s. And these time periods are relatively close, but in general historiography, we think of like the break between the old left and the new left, and I'm just kind of looking at the continuity between analyses in those four modes. So it should be really interesting, being part of a workshop. I was on a fellowship at University of Chicago for 2 years, which was really difficult in many ways because there wasn't a cohort because of the pandemic and other things. There wasn't a lot of engagement. So I'm really looking forward to like actual intellectual engagement at Harvard. So another development is, I know y'all see me looking shiny and robust. I am pregnant. I am in my second trimester. I am partnered. So anyway, for whatever that's worth.
And the baby's due. It's not due on my birthday, but we're gonna make it happen.
Yeah, so it's due the day before Layla's birthday. She will obviously be the godmother. So for anybody who knows me, you know that it's like, are you kidding me? Like I was hot, thought I was just gonna be, roll one deep to the end, single, just doing me. And so, but I ended up finding my person, my life partner. And we had, so we sort of, the baby is more or less planned, right? So we thought August was when we would work to conceive for reasons. But when a man and a woman love each other and when you love each other very much, you do things that then create, new life. So it's a lot, y'all. I have many emotions about it. I have a lot of sort of consternation about going from like a party of one to now a party of three and having to sort of be collective about the decisions I make. It's hugely inconvenient to be pregnant while moving right now, especially temporarily. The first trimester is the ghetto. Like I was super sick.
She threw up on the plane,
yeah, it was all bad. I'm feeling much better now. But it's super exciting. Like, and so, when I was talking earlier about sort of academia not necessarily being the center of my life anymore, being partnered and start, thinking about what it even means to start a family has sort of, my life has become much more expansive. That's exciting. It's exciting. It is exciting. There's just a lot of nerves. There's a lot of unknowns right now because we're in the process of moving. Mind your business. If I wanted to say who it was, I would have already said it. So don't ask, don't be guessing in the chat. Well, do you, but at some point, perhaps we'll have him on, perhaps we'll talk about it. But for now, we're keeping things, more or less private, but I'm having a girl.
Which I'm very excited.
I was not very excited. I wanted a boy, but, it is what it is. As one of my friends told me that sort of put it into perspective, it's like, I'll come from a strong sort of matrilineal line, a line of very strong, very brilliant women. And so, and also the nail tech. So
yeah.
The last time I got my nails done, the nail tech was telling me, so for Vietnamese New Year, this is the year of the cat, but it's also it's a golden year. So once every 60 years is a golden year for the different animals. And so she was saying that this is a really lucky year to have a girl, and that Vietnamese women who are rich were actually paying to have IVF to have a baby this year. Because if you have a girl baby during this particular golden year, it's supposed to bring either wealth, like affluence, or do something really important, or just be like, it's a lucky baby basically. So I was like, all right, then whatever. So that's a big update. Obviously, we'll be talking about this more throughout the show. Because this is my first child. I'm not somebody who's been thinking about this since I was 16 years old, or marriage or building a family or any of that. So it's all very new. And again, there's just a lot of emotions around it, but it is exciting, and I will be posting my registry at some point. So send your girl a bassinet, some diapers, wipes, whatever. All right. So what else? So Layla, you're gonna be on fellowship too.
I am. I did forget to mention that. So my fellowship is a in-house fellowship at the Humanities Center at Northeastern. It's actually the chair that I mentioned, Regina Jones-Charles. She is the coordinator for the fellowship this year. The theme of the fellowship is world making, world building, which interestingly enough was the same theme for the fellowship in Germany. I actually had my book workshop earlier this year. So the working title, the tentative title of my book is An Anthropology of Pan-Africanism in the 21st Century. The book workshop went really well. Like there was a lot, what I will say that I really appreciate about the book workshop. So I was a person who had a very tumultuous graduate school career. I developed depression and anxiety. I gained a bunch of weight. My hair was falling out. Y'all, at one point in time, these people, when I was having anxiety attacks, and these people prescribed me albuterol, an inhaler, because I was having trouble breathing. And they did not associate that with anxiety. But if you know, albuterol is a stimulant. So it was actually making my breathing worse. It's like, people really gonna kill me. I'm fucking die out here. But anyway, so I said all that to say that all throughout graduate school, I would say not until I met Sharice, honestly. We met in February 2019, I believe. Not until I met Sharice did I really feel like I had an intellectual community among other academics, right? And so I would say that
y'all know I got the plug. Okay.
And when I say that, I mean that for me, like I never went into academia as a sort of intellectual project. Like academia was something that like the way was kind of paved for me. Like I just kind of fell into it and I ended up doing things that were already important to me based on the life that I was already living. And so like I did have like a sort of political community outside of work, school, but having actual like intellectual peers in the work environment was not something that I had until I met Sharice, and that kind of expanded that. But the book workshop was actually really nice because I felt like it was the first time I had a group of people come together around my work whose opinions that I valued, that was not antagonistic, even as people were giving critical feedback and places where, things needed to be expanded or things could be done away with. It was actually a really nice experience. And and it was like, it's interesting that's such a shift for me because I feel very antagonistic towards the academy and sort of intellectual engagement in that way, especially when it's about my own work. Because like, when I was in graduate school as an anthropologist, like I was the only Black person for 5 years in my cohort. I was the only Latin Americanist. I was the only person working on Pan-Africanism in any way, shape, fashion, or form. And so the kinds of questions that like, people would ask me would be such like basic one-on-one questions that I didn't feel like they ever pushed my own thinking, right? Whereas for my workshop, Jemima Pierre participated, George Chikwerlo-Mayer, who we had on the podcast before, Keisha Khan Perry, Sheila Walker, right? So it was, and then even one of my colleagues, Asian woman, my colleagues at Northeastern in anthropology, and I just really appreciated being able to have sort of critical dialogue. And I say all that to say that it has now, I haven't been very prolific in my writing, right? Because I have a very antagonistic relationship towards writing. And I do think that as a product of the book workshop, these two conferences that we've done this summer, I'm writing a little bit more and thinking more about, the fact that I can actually produce writing in a way that I need to get tenure, because that's the other thing, right? Like now that I've accepted that I'm gonna be an academic and I'm settled from there, like I gotta keep my little job, because y'all know about the one thing that gives me a little piece of happiness is being able to travel, like my flexibility. So yeah, so the book is in progress. For the fellowship, I'm kind of working on a new sort of iteration. So I don't know how much you all have followed Francia Marquez's vice presidency, and even her sort of work prior to the vice presidency, but one of the slogans that sort of came out of Colombia, the Afro-Colombian movement, is Vivir Sabroso, which is like to live tasty or deliciously. And so I'm really kind of thinking about that idea of living, of what it means to like build a world where we live tasty, right? We live deliciously. And I'm thinking about that through the lens of her vice presidency and the attempts that she's attempting to sort of build this kind of Pan-Africanist network. And so that project that I'll work on during my time at the Humanities Center at Northeastern will be sort of focused on that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Speaking of books, well, I feel like I've been going in the opposite direction, y'all. I've not read or written anything in quite some time, with the exception of I just literally finished my page correction. So went over my galleys for my book. So Black Scare, Red Scare, Theorizing Capitalist Racism in the United States will drop November 27th. So you can pre-order now on Amazon or on the University of Chicago website.
And who did the cover?
Oh, my mom. Yeah. The cover is so dope. My mom designed the cover, so yay her. So yeah, so that's the last thing I read is my book. I mean, it's bars, but yeah, but I feel like, listen, let me tell you something. I feel like, again, I feel like, damn, am I even a fucking academic anymore? Like, I have written literally nothing. I have read almost nothing. I mean, I read things here and there, like things on Hood Communist, Black Agenda Report, that type of thing. But I look forward to things being more settled so I can just get back into studying. That's also will be good for the workshop, because I'm like, man, I'm losing neurons. But listen, let me tell you something. Being intelligent and politically grounded in this world is actually feels like a liability. Yeah. And it actually is problematic, but nonetheless, it's something that is fulfilling. So yeah. Yeah, and that's a good segue into study. So circling back to the Radical Critical Theory Circle, I'm doing a little bit of a report back. So I presented a paper called Black Scare, Red Scare, Then and Now. Did not write anything new. It was basically cobbling things together from the book. And which helps me. So actually doing that though helps me sort of think about, kind of get back into the book, but think about see, here's the thing about writing a book, man. It's like you write the book, then you edit the book, and then you get a little bit of a break. You got to edit the book again, right? Then you have to talk about the book over and over and over again if you want to sell things, right? And so I'm not that good at explaining stuff all the time, especially things that can be complex ideas. So I think doing workshops like this helps me to sort of break down sort of how I want to talk about the book. And it's a big book, meaning that, so it is long, but it's a big book in terms of there's a lot of big ideas. And so thinking about like, how do I want to talk about these ideas? How can I break things down in a way that's not like frustrating for me? And it's interesting to hear the types of questions that people ask when they're not necessarily grounded in Black studies or Black study or Black radical political thought, the Black radical tradition, et cetera. So I think it was pretty good engagement. What else? So my paper went, I think I presented maybe the second day. So there was good engagement, and I enjoyed the workshop for the most part. One of the more interesting papers was, there's a woman named Hagar. She presented on torture in Israel, and sort of talked about sort of the way that bureaucracy reproduces and naturalizes torture, and the ways that it reproduces the ideas that Palestinians don't tell the truth, or that they're, the way that they understand their own subjection to terrorism and state violence gets disciplined out through the bureaucratization, and that bureaucratization is ostensibly represents Israel as a democracy. So I'm not explaining it very well, but it was a really interesting, really good paper. There was a Russian contingency there.
And that was very interesting, y'all.
It was very interesting because I think all of them were in exile. But there were varying degrees of how they understood
US imperialism.
Both US imperialism, but also Russian imperialism and the war. It ran the gamut. I think all were critical of the war, which is understandable because we're critical of war, right? But some people wanted the West to win and thought the West winning was the best thing to happen, which is crazy. Like you could be anti-war and fundamentally understand, if you're anti-war, you must also be anti-NATO, you must also be anti-US, because those are the like sort of epitomes of warmongering. There were folks who understood the sort of NATO aggression. That was the foundation of, the Russian special operation, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, even as they're still critical of it, right? Because I think it's okay to be, it's not black and white in the sense that if you are sort of understand that, if you're know the role of the West, that you are supportive of Putin or Russia, right? And so it was interesting to hear what their endogenous critiques were, especially when they seem to come from an anti-imperialist lens and not necessarily whatever the other things were, And then it was interesting to hear them talk about sort of their experience of exile, right? And what they can and cannot say, how the anti-war factions or persons who are critical of the war were being treated and were oriented. So I did learn a lot in that regard. I don't necessarily think it changed my own perspective of the war, but it just was interesting to see. And I guess that's it would be the same type of thing if you talk to people from the United States about the war. Well, I think the US, I think most of those people would be much, much less critical, but it was interesting to hear the sort of spectrum of how people understood the war. Largely academic, because they're mostly academic, but some were involved in various organizations. What else? So yeah, so there were a lot of interesting conversations. Oh, another good paper, I forgot her name, but she presented about the Zapatistas. Bagona.
She's at the New School, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
So her paper was really interesting.
It was. Because it was about I remember she used the snail was the metaphor, whatever, but it was about the Zapatista logics in terms of time and organization and how they basically create systems of governance, for lack of a better term, and autonomous systems of governance amongst them. So yeah, that one was really interesting. And even Nasser's paper on the camps, right? On Palestinian refugee camps. Well, refugee camps writ large, but with a particular focus on Palestinian refugee camps, and kind of his ultimate conclusion about what it means to organize beyond the state, and kind of I guess in the end it was he came around to the conclusion that there has to be something like the commune as an answer or response to the state. And again, for him, not anti-statist in that classic sense, but that there had to be something sort of beyond it. So those were some of the more interesting papers. Some of the other ones were very, like you said, esoteric. And
yeah, it was very Eurocentric, right? In the sense of like Europe being the focus. So there was this one paper that people were like, that was about sort of European democracy. It was one of the last papers. About like European democracy and how more institutions, like having stronger transnational institutions is important for sort of revivifying democracy in Europe. And, some folks just had to point out, we have international organizations like the WTO, like the UN, like, NATO, and being right, and being transnational doesn't automatically portend more democracy, right? There was some complete gibberish.
Well, so the paper I presented was Revolutionary Pan-Africanism and the Formation of a Multicentric and Pluripolar World. And so, I've talked about this before, but I'm really interested in how the kind of current iteration of the Bolivarian project in the Americas is kind of indebted to the African independence era project. And so it was interesting, obviously, because I didn't present my paper as so much of a political theory, although I think it was Chavez's Blue Book is where he first puts forth his ideas about sort of 21st century socialism and the kind of differences, right? A kind of humanistic socialism, a socialism that takes, certain things into account. But what I will say is that a lot of the conversations, again, there came up around the lack of understanding. So, what I would say this, I think we often tend to think about the US general public as quite, sort of uninformed about the rest of the world. But I am just growing after spending these last couple of years in Europe. Generally, I think people are uninformed about the circumstances that they are not present in, right? And so there were just, again, I think a lot of it was very clear to me that all these people who are theoreticians, who were sort of critical theory people, had not engaged the work of any of the sort of Black political theorists, whether they be Pan-Africanists, Black radical, whatever,
decolonial,
whatever. And so, you know, just having a basic conversation that introduced people like Sekou Touré or Kwame Nkrumah. And it's, to me, it's really interesting to me when people consider themselves critical theorists and don't engage Kwame Nkrumah, because he was a political theorist and he was a philosopher, right?
well, because they reduced critical theory to the Frankfurt School.
Yeah.
And sometimes in all school, like it's European critical
Yes.
theory. And Foucault.
Yes.
I think that we've asked a question about Foucault, which I completely ignore because it's giving CIA, but okay.
Yes.
But you also updated your paper in response
did.
to, because there was a paper by one of the Pauls who was talking about like the left doesn't engage culture, needs to engage
Yes.
more in the politics of culture, something along.
So his argument was that unlike the left, and again, we're talking about the left and right in the US, right? Which is skewed, but unlike the left, the right in the US fights the battle on all fronts.
Mm-hmm.
And so he presented the day before my paper. So I did update my paper because, you know, the thing is, we don't, as African people, we don't have the luxury of not fighting our battles on all fronts, right?
Precisely.
And so when we think about all these people who are political theorists, they also are theorists of culture, right? Like Sekou Touré, Cabral, they're all thinking about culture all the time. And so they're
And religion.
and religion, right? And so one of the things that I updated the paper to kind of think about, I think Hood Communist, or maybe the Black Agenda Report, has a piece that they put out
by
Jibo on Sekou Touré's sort of thought. Because I mean, Sekou Touré has a whole book, Revolution, Culture, and Pan-Africanism. But about sort of these questions about what it means, you know, Sekou Touré doesn't take issue in the same way that, you know, classical Marxists do with religion, right? His whole thing is, okay, you could be Muslim, you could be Christian, you could be pagan, but you need to be the best Muslim, Christian, pagan that abides by certain principles that works towards revolution. Right? You need to be a revolutionary Christian, you need to be a revolutionary Muslim, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I think that what that comment that he made about the right being the only ones that fight the battle on all fronts, it just shows me how much the sort of Black African ethos is not a part of the way they think about political struggles, because again, we don't have the luxury of not thinking about what it means to struggle at the political level, at the religious level, social organization, gender. Like, we have to be constantly thinking about all those things because they are sort of the way we live. Like, it's an everyday battle and struggle. So I just thought that was really interesting and short-sighted.
But what also shows too, it's a parallel to this is how our so-called friends on the left think it's more viable to organize with right-wingers who, for example, are against the FBI because the left is against the FBI, rather than organizing either internationally with sort of international leftist organizations, or even with certain Black people, right? And so because of that sort of lack of knowledge about that struggle, or because this idea that race is epiphenomenal, or the refusal of settler colonialism, or the refusal of labor aristocracy, and those things that critique a particular project of whiteness, even this paper was like, we can learn from the right.
Yes.
Which for us is like, no, we'll learn from Cabral and Touré and Nkrumah, all Touré's, right? Yes. Nkrumah, Claudia Jones, etc. Because we organizing with the right is dangerous for us. That's not even it's really a structural impossibility for real.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting and also, so there was another paper about austerity and how austerity isn't reducible to neoliberalism. And so there was two cases that were looking at how austerity was operating in Britain and then austerity was operating in fascist Italy. No analysis of imperialism or colonialism. And this is the 1930s, I think, that she was looking at. And so, and of course the response to this was like, this is beyond the scope of the paper. And I'm looking at what's happening internally. There's no way to understand what's happening internally without understanding empire, especially at that moment. And what linked Great Britain and Italy most of all is imperialism, is a colonial project. And so, amenability to fascism. And so it's unthinkable to me to even think about the
Yes.
United States as not an empire, right?
Yes.
Even as we're looking at domestic questions, so that, the bifurcation of domestic and foreign policy it's not a real thing. So yeah, so we definitely were the people that were pushing for, like, thinking about colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, and race. And it was just striking how not relevant that was. Even these people who consider themselves to be defending democracy, right? To be radical on the left, thinking about world-making projects and this shit. It's like, oh, Africa's a thing, like the Caribbean's a thing, Black people are a thing, so.
Yeah, it was, I mean, we had a lot of note passing and side eyeing during that conference.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yes.
But we were very vocal about it too. It
Yes.
wasn't like,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, but overall, I think it was a good experience. And I do think that those folks, even if they never think about it again, like, benefited from our presidents. And we also sort of, I think, again, I always benefit from hearing like more orthodox Marxist analysis, because I almost never think about white Marxists other than like Lenin, because that's not how I came to Marxism. So it's interesting. So I have to like remind myself, oh, you should read, got to read the whites, or think about this or that, so.
And I guess in the next iteration of the podcast, we will give a report back about what happens in France, because this conference is explicitly supposed to be about Marx and race. So we will see how that goes. I don't, I think the conference might even be, I don't know when we're going to put this up, but it might even be available online to watch, but I don't know when this is going to go up.
So yeah, and that's, I think we're still the only Black people though. Carol Boyce Davis was supposed to come. Yes. She was supposed to be on our panel. They put the 3 Black women on the same panel. I'm not sure, there might be other Black people, but I think we might be the only Black people. So,
we shall see.
We shall see.
All right. And so I guess to round it out, we will talk a little bit about what is making revolution in our lives right now. So currently it is June 19th. So June 29th would have been Kwame Ture's 82nd birthday. And as you all know, I'm a member of the All Black People's Revolutionary Party. And so
GC.
Yes. And so we are having a Kwame Ture Day seminar on July 15th at noon. It's a virtual seminar. I guess somehow I will. Yeah, if you go to the AAPRPGC's website, you'll be able to find all that information there. I said that because since we're not doing all the bells and whistles editing, then I can't put the link in.
Well, we can put it
in the show notes. Yeah, we can do that in the description. But the theme for the Kwame Ture Day is from students and youth to lifetime revolutionaries. So this is the thing, y'all. We have an internal struggle over very long and wordy titles. So the way that it is read right now is from students and youth to lifetime revolutionaries. African students, youth, and women must fulfill their historical mission and wage class struggle in Africa, the diaspora, and worldwide for one unified socialist Africa. I think you get the point. I am working. We're still working on the title to condense it, but that's sort of where we are in process. But this is, again, if you haven't followed the sort of history and trajectory of the party, one thing that has been really central to the party from its inception is study, right? And so there were very early on, there was a decision to focus on youth and students in particular, because of the way that study needed to be sort of engaged. And so one of the things that we're trying to think about is what that transition looks like, right? Because youth or students, are a sort of transitory category of people. And the thing is, student activism has always sort of been an important catalyst in sort of major movements, but because that tends to be a short period of people's lives, because once you move out of that sort of student position and into a kind of working position, what it looks like to be an organizer changes because of the way you have to engage in work. We're really trying to sort of think about what does it mean to have had this kind of focus on youth and students, but to also then push that to what it needs to be lifelong revolutionaries. We are, very much interested in having this as a conversation on what that really looks like, right? Like, again, I always tell my students, if I had all the answers, we'd be free. So this is definitely a place to kind of come and think about these ideas together. If there are folks who are explicitly doing work on these things or with these communities, we would be happy to have people engage, be a part of the conversation. So please look out for that in the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm. So for me, something that I'll be attending soon is from June 23rd to 25th, will be the Community Movement Builders is convening the National Black Radical Organizing Conference with the theme of Unity in Our Lifetime, connecting the national Black struggle for self-determination with Pan-Africanism. There's going to be a bunch of panels and workshops. I'm on a panel on Sunday called Black Complicity in American Imperialism, Can Pan-Africanism Be the Solution? With with mostly dope people. It's a Big Ten event, right? There's a lot of different ideological orientations that will be present. And along with sort of panels and workshops, there's going to be action as well. So I'm just looking out, I want to give you all a sense of what's going to be happening. So the first sort of plenary is called State of the Black Masses, What is to be done and how are our people relating to empire? There's another plenary called Movements in Motion, Organizations on the Front Lines of the National Liberation Struggle, Base Building, Mass Work, and Ideological Positioning of Movements on the Ground, another long ass title. There's a panel discussion on confronting state terror, political prisoners, policing, and incarceration. A panel discussion on national liberation, national unity, self-determination, and socialism. Another one, I'm discovering their generation's mission. What is the role of students and youth in revolution? So clearly the thinking about students and youth, and hopefully there'll be a discussion disentangling the two, because not all youth are students, right? And not all students are youth. The panel that I'm going to be on, Black Complicity in American Imperialism, Can Pan-Africanism Be the Solution? Another panel titled Propaganda, the Fight for the Hearts and Minds of the Masses. And then the closing plenary is called Money in the Nonprofit Industrial Complex. How has the nonprofit industrial complex changed how we organize? Is a liberation strategy possible through these formations? And then one of the culminating things is sort of Stop Cop City Action. So this is taking place in Atlanta or specifically in Jonesboro, Georgia. And as you know, there's a huge push to stop Cop City. Recently, City Council voted with only 4 dissenting to actually move forward with funding Cop City, despite the fact that it was the sort of most attended city council meeting, I think, in history, with like 18 hours of testimony, something like this. They still decided to fund this. Obviously, there was the murder of Tortuguita, who's a forest defender earlier this year. There was a charge of, I think, 34 or 39 activists with domestic terrorism for their protests against Cop City. There was the arrest of, I think it's called the Atlanta Bail Fund folks. They were charged them with embezzlement for providing bail fund and other support to people who have been arrested. And so there's a sort of all-out attack right now on the Stop Cop City movement, because it's becoming more national in scope. It's effective in different ways. So there's battles that have been lost, but I think it's raising the consciousness across different movements and bringing those movements together. So you got the environmental movement, obviously the Black liberation movement, the abolitionists, political prisoners. So all of these different things are coming together. So anyway, if you're in the area, pull up. There's going to be a lot going on. There's going to be a lot of people there. A lot of interesting conversations. I think there'll be a lot of interesting debate. Probably some shenanigans.
Always shenanigans.
As happens. So yeah, so we're thinking about these two events in terms of revolution, because what is it? Revolution is a constant struggle, right? And there's a lot of action happening right now, from strikes to authorizations for strikes. So again, there's organizing around Cop City, to drawing on our past, like thinking with Kwame Ture, et cetera, et cetera. But the left is not winning. And we don't nobody has the answers. If any group, if any individual had the answers, then we would be much farther along than we are. And so, you know, revolution is it's a quotidian thing. It's also a sort of, it's also an epochal thing, right? And I think that that's something to keep in mind.
I was just looking up this quote because I always think about it, and it's one that I even have included in my dissertation. It's one I keep up all the time, by Leila Khaled, who, by the way, I was named after. But she says, "I've learned that a woman can be a fighter, a freedom fighter, a political activist. She can fall in love and be loved. She can be married, have children, be a mother. Revolution must also mean life, every aspect of life." And I think that that is part of what we're thinking about as we come back to this iteration of the podcast, to think about what are all the aspects of life and the ways that we are attempting to wage whatever struggles that we can on whatever terrains that we can, right? But contrary to old boys thing that we're not waging struggle on all terrains. And so I think that, you know, motherhood, love, relationships, study, writing, that is what we hope to bring to you all with this iteration of the podcast, and we will see where it goes.
We will see where it goes. And if we really have our shit together, we will go live this Friday evening to just sort of check in about this episode and to chop it up with y'all. So hopefully that will happen. We fly back on Friday, but we arrive Friday afternoon in Boston. So assuming that all goes well, we hope to do that. And we're excited, looking forward to this iteration of the podcast. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what you all think about it. So for now, just shoot us an email to LifeStudyRevolution@gmail.com. Let us know what you think. We'll post this on our social media. You can comment. Yeah, and let us know. We look forward to engaging with y'all.
That's it. Peace.